Welcome everybody. I was thinking of video ideas when this one hit me. I'm someone who knows way too much about Team Fortress 2, like a stupid amount. I spent countless hours basically studying the game and its history. Not for any real reason, I just enjoy learning about the intricacies of the game and learning about the before times. This is why I've always been interested in stuff like cut content or old stats for things in games that I play. For example, Doom, Call of Duty Black Ops, and of course, Team Fortress 2. Enough about that. I'm basically saying that this love for history and the history of games and game weapons, stats, etc. is why I'm making this stupid little series. I'm going to be trying it out with Scout first, and if it seems like you guys enjoy it, I'll be doing the rest of the 9 classes. Or 8 classes, I guess you could say. Depends on semantics, how you want to break that down. Basically, I'm going to read the current stats for weapons before reading out the original stats for weapons. This will not be a comparison of current stats to the best stats, though I may touch on it. No, this is day 1 stats. This is also not concept stats either, so I won't go over how the Sitting Sleeper used to be an SMG, or how the Sunhouse Stick used to be the Boston Basher. Yeah, and then I'm also not going to go over stats that were intended to work, but didn't. There's only one major example I can think of, and we'll discuss it in this video. I'll explain it, but that's no more than that. It's not going to influence the grading at all. This is how they released and how they originally functioned day 1 when you can use them. This includes every single weapon, so I don't care if a weapon changed within a day or two. We're going over the OG. I will compare the two, and then I'll explain why one is better than the other, or explain how one may be superior to the other in another instance. I will go through every weapon a class has, trying to dedicate no more than 2 to 3 minutes, but still getting within that range. I can't make any promises. There's some I really want to talk about, and there's others where there's not really much to talk about. But because there was a stat change, I have to go over them. We're going to start out with Scout because Scout is always first. However, we're going to do it differently this time. Rather than going in class order for subsequent videos, I'll let you guys decide in the comments, or maybe I'll put a poll out, either one, but your comments will matter to me, and basically just write which one you want to see next. Whichever one gets the most votes, I guess, or the one I see the most, is the one I will work on next. Or of course, if you guys don't like it, let me know that as well. Either way, enough blabbing on. I've already done it for almost 3 minutes. Let's go. Starting off with the first unlockable primary, we have the Force of Nature. Oh man, the fan. Some may not know, but this weapon has had quite a bit of history. The current stats are an increased knockback on enemies as well as yourself. This knockback being able to fling enemies, but also being able to launch yourself upward or in the direction that you're going for a pseudo triple jump if you wish. There's a hidden stat that some may not know about, and we'll kind of touch on it later. You have to do a minimum of 30 damage in order to launch enemies. It also comes equipped with a 50% faster firing speed and 20% more pellets per shot for a total of 12 rather than 10. This thing also reloads both shells at once, and a hidden downside that kind of goes along with this is that if you only shoot 1 shell, 2 shells will be subtracted from your ammo count if you reload after only shoot 1. Hope that makes sense. The downsides, the actual listed ones, are that this thing does 10% less damage, which may seem strange, but I think it's more of a panic attack situation, dealing less damage but more pellets, making it more effective at close range, worse at long range. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that's just how it works. The max damage is 113 with full ramp up rather than 104. It also has an obvious penalty of ammo loaded, being 66%. It's a double barrel shotgun. Obviously it's going to have 2 shots. It would be bizarre if it didn't. Either way, let's compare it to the old O. Well, it's the same, but it had a 20% damage penalty, which basically means I could do a max of about 102 or so. Well, this is pretty cut and dry. The new, not so fast. There's actually some we have to go over. There's a few things that actually makes this version of the Force of Nature better. Now, if you suck and can only hit 1 shot, then the current Force of Nature is going to be your best friend. It's going to be a lot better. However, the old Force of Nature has 2 differences that actually make it better for those who have any form of actual skill. The difference being, 1, both shots used to launch enemies. Currently, only the first shot can launch enemies, with the second shot just being normal, I guess. This wasn't always the case. While you couldn't quadruple jump as it didn't apply to the shooter, it did apply to the person who got shot by it. So you can hit him with the first one, knock him in the air, and then hit him with the second one, and knock him in the air again. And here's the thing, this is with the old knockback mechanic. Some of you may not have been playing at the time, but basically it stun locks you, removing all momentum, which just means you're easily lined up for a next shot. On top of that, too, the knockback was much more scaled back, which, if you think about it, is actually a bonus. The super knockback was more of a bug, and they just kind of ran with it. The original OG Force of Nature had knockback more akin to air blasts. Like I said, it also stun locked people. This made it easy to lock people in place and two-tap them for massive damage with an increased firing speed. On top of that, I talked about it a little bit earlier, the 30 damage minimum stat that makes it so you can't do less than 30 damage, otherwise it won't launch people, did not exist on this weapon initially. So you could still knock people back even if you just hit them with a pellet or two. Overall, I'd say if you're a skilled player, the old Force of Nature takes the W here. It wins. And that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to assume that you're kind of an average to maybe higher skilled player. Though the new Force of Nature still has its place, the old one just hits different, literally. Moving on. We'll continue and go in order of release date. The next weapon that was released for Scout was a little bit different than all the other scatterguns. This one was more of a pistol than anything, the Shortstop. The Shortstop is a very bizarre weapon. It has the upside of a tighter spread, more damage per pellet, but it also only has 4 pellets. In addition to that, it lacks the 175% damage ramp up that all the other scatterguns have, and it only has 150% just like regular shotguns. It does fire faster, but that means that the max damage is only 72. So, kind of weigh that out. It reloads all its rounds at once, which is only 4, so it has a secret 34% penalty, and it reloads about 50% or so slower than the pistol does. I know that's a weird way to quantify it, but it will make sense later. It has a secondary fire that gives you the ability to shove someone a short distance, dealing 1 damage, though I don't know anybody who legitimately uses this, except on Upward to push people off cliffs. Other than that, meh. The only listed downside is the pushback vulnerability, which is 20% while deployed. The Shortstop is really strange, man, but how does it stack up against its original version? Well, this weapon is the one I was talking about that had a misleading stat. This weapon on release claimed to slow enemies on hit, which is part of how it got its name. However, the stat never actually worked, and I'm kind of glad it didn't. That would have made the Shortstop legitimately annoying, instead of just kind of being a weird side grade that people like me like, because they want to be different. Though, yeah, this never actually worked. But what has changed? Well, first, the set bonus that this thing has no longer exists. I'm not really taking that into account as it's really unfair, but I thought I would point it out. No more 150 health scouts running around. There's only really 3 big differences between the current Shortstop and the original. First, the only stat that's changed and is listed is that the 20% pushback vulnerability while active used to be 80% but at all times, which depending on how you play was either amazing for getaways, but I think most of the time it was kind of a pain in the ass for staying in fights because you got flung halfway across the map, especially from explosive damage. I could imagine this really sucking. There are 2 more changes that weren't listed stat. The first one's kind of interesting. This weapon used to use secondary ammo, which meant that it held 36 in reserve rather than the standard 32, though when paired with a pistol it meant you were running out of ammo very quickly. Logistically, this made sense since, the top Derringer this weapon was based off of is in fact a pistol. The Shortstop is not a shotgun, so to speak. Though I think it was a good choice to get rid of this stat, it just didn't make sense. And plus the extra 4 ammo that you have really did not make much of a difference. This sounds like all sunshine and rainbows, and maybe a very easy victory for the modern Shortstop. However, there's one big thing that makes this decision quite difficult. First, the 20% healing bonus did not exist on the original Shortstop, so that wasn't an easy victory. Second, the original Shortstop reloaded 50% faster, or about the same as the pistol, which is why I compared the reload speed to the pistol initially. This made it near the same as the pistol with near primary damage. The stream of damage was just a lot better on the original Shortstop, especially if you paired it with the Mad Milk, the weapon that came out in the set. The damage has not been touched on the Shortstop to my knowledge. I guess random damage spread was obviously a factor, but not really considering that here. So which one was better? This one was really tough and comes down to if you can hit your shots. While this might be controversial, I'm actually going to give this win to the modern Shortstop. While that reload was quick and made it better for going from enemy to enemy, just constantly applying pressure, you were tossed around by everything, especially soldiers, and if you ran a pistol with it, you would screw yourself over. If you're smart, the modern Shortstop is a little less punishing and likely makes damaging enemies easier, and it just makes the weapon a little more consistent. Plus, that extra 4 shots didn't make a big enough difference to shift it into the favor of the OG Shortstop. However, on any given day, I could easily switch on this one. This one was actually difficult, but I'm going to give it to the modern day Shortstop. Let's go on to the next Scout primary release. Now we have one of the billion weapons added on June 23rd, 2011, aka the Uber update. That weapon being the Soda Popper. Okay, listen, for those who know their stat history or played when this weapon was first added, already know what's going to happen. However, we need to go over the current stats. The Soda Popper is an interesting weapon, having a 50% faster firing speed, just like the Force of Nature. I mean, it literally is the Force of Nature with a critical can strapped to the bottom. So, there you go. However, it also comes with a 25% faster reload speed, which makes reloading a lot less of a chore. If you use the Soda Popper and then try to switch to the Force of Nature, you know how weird it can be. The Force of Nature is just really sluggish. Then there is the main draw of this item, being that on hit, it builds hype. Hype is a pretty simple mechanic. If you deal 350 damage, you will fill this meter that can be activated at any time in order to give you 5 extra mid-air jumps for a total of 6 jumps for 10 full seconds. You can switch weapons after this, you just have to have the actual weapon out, but this is often paired with the Winger because of the 25% jump bonus. The downsides is less ammo loaded, obviously, it's a double barrel shotgun, and then the secret discarding of extra shells if you reload only after firing 1. Okay, I'm not even going to pretend like this isn't obvious. The old Soda Popper wins by a landslide. Now, if this was the old Soda Popper versus like the middle-aged Soda Popper, then maybe it would be a little bit closer because of the utility of the old, or rather middle-aged Soda Popper. But either way, the OG Soda Popper was just stupid. For OGs, or those who know stat history, know why this is the case. But for those uninitiated, why do you think there is a critical can strapped to the bottom? It gives you 5 extra mid-air jumps, so why the critical can? Well, because it originally didn't give you 5 extra mid-air jumps. Instead, it would give you 8 full seconds of mini crits. Yep, and that's why it has the critical strapped to the bottom. And you may say, okay, that's fair, right? Wrong, because once again, some of you may not know this, but the Soda Popper originally did not fill by dealing damage. That was a newer mechanic. It filled by simply running around with this weapon out. I'm serious. You would build hype simply by running around. This is even how it worked with the 5 mid-air jumps mechanic up until 2016, I believe it was the Meet Your Match update. There are 2 other stat changes I should probably mention. This weapon used to not be able to random crit, which makes sense I guess, since you had an on-demand crit mechanic. And it would also not allow you to store the hype activating as soon as you filled the meter, but you could just switch to your pistol, so yeah. Also, one interesting thing I thought I would bring up. So, like I said, this would give you 8 full seconds of mini crits for just running around. Some people might think that the Winger and Soda Popper are in the same set because it helps you with mobility, right? That's how we think of it now, the 25 extra jump height that it has now, the 25% higher jump height, excuse me, and then also the 5 mid-air jumps. But in reality, this set on release was actually damage focused. We'll get to that when we get to that, alright? When we get to the winger, I'll go more in depth on why that was the case. But either way, this one shouldn't be too controversial. The soda popper is still good, don't get it twisted, but the original soda popper was just different. It was just different. Like, stupid design. So, it takes the W here. Finally, we have an interesting one. The last few weapons were either obvious or just had small changes done to them. This one is a little more difficult because of how different the weapons work, so it takes a lot more brain power to analyze and try to figure out which one is actually better, just because they don't really work the same way anymore. That weapon is the Babyface's Blaster. Let's begin with what this weapon does. On hit, you can build something called Boost. It takes 100 damage to build this meter, and building it up will allow you to move 40% faster than Scout's base speed, going from 133% to 173%, or 400 hammer units to 520 hammer units. So, really freaking fast. That is the only upside for this weapon. The downsides are as follows. First, a 34% magazine size penalty, dropping the ammo loaded from 6 to just 4, so pretty standard for shotguns. In addition, you start off each life 10% slower. It's actually 13% if you want to be technical. So your speed is reduced from 133% to 120%. Then there are the two major drawbacks of this weapon. They both have to do with how you lose your boost. You can lose 75% by double jumping at any time, which is a big chunk, though the big one is the fact that 1 point of damage reduces your boost by 4%, meaning it effectively takes 25 damage to remove all of your boost. 25 damage to deplete every last drop of it, and it's the main reason why people dislike this weapon nowadays. At least dislike using it as a serious side grade. I've found it's pretty fun in like 2 Fort, but as like a serious contender to go up against a scattergun, this is really punishing. Now let's switch gears into talking about the old Babyface's Blaster that came out back in 2012. Not the 2013 version, not the really busted version, the original iteration of the Babyface's Blaster, as it worked quite differently. The main boost mechanic worked the exact same, allowing you to move up to 40% faster than Scout's base movement speed. But that's where the similarities end. The Babyface's Blaster also came equipped with a 40% accuracy bonus, which tightened the spread pretty significantly. This was a huge advantage if you could aim, but if you couldn't, it could be actually seen as more of a downside since you move faster, and made it a little more difficult. So it really just depended on how good you were at aiming. Now for the actual downsides of the weapon. So this one's really interesting, and I had to redo this whole segment because I misunderstood this. So first, unlike today, you did not start off 13% slower. You started off 35% slower. However, the wording is really weird here. So how it currently works, basically, is that the percentage it says it's taking is using the in-game percentage. And that kind of gives you an idea of how fast you're going to move. For example, you move 13% slower by default, at 0% boost. Scout moves at what is considered 133% movement speed, so you move at 120% movement speed. Is this making sense so far? Stick with me. However, it originally was not like that. It was a little bit different. Here's the thing. So instead of moving 98% slower, since 133 minus 35%, it didn't work off the in-game percentage. It worked off of your hammer unit speed. So instead of being brought down to 98%, you were brought down all the way to 86%, which kind of explains how the original Babyface's Blaster was worded. I remember reading it and it said, you could move up to double the speed. And I was like, double the speed? That's not right. But in fact, it was right. You started out at 86%. You double that, that's 172, effectively 173%. So you legitimately did double your speed. Yeah, you started at 86%, and for reference, Demo Man moves at 93% and Soldier moves at 80%. You would start at the in-between of Soldier and Demo Man. Not to worry, while you were slower than Demo Man at the start, it only took 100 damage to get it back up to full. The 34% magazine size penalty also did not exist, meaning that this was the only other scattergun besides stock that held 6 for a short time. though its original downside wasn't that much better. In fact, it was kind of worse on paper. It had a 30% damage penalty, which meant that you could only deal a max of about 73 to 74 damage. I say worse on paper, and I'll get into why later. Just let's go over the last little bit here. Last downside was very harsh. If you even so much as jumped, not double jumped, just jumped, you would lose all of your boost. However, that was the only way you could lose your boost. As long as you never jumped, you did not lose it. Damage did not reduce boost. So, which one is better? Well, the 2013 Babyface Blaster, obviously, but not counting that one. This choice was actually really difficult. The current Babyface Blaster is a little less punishing on paper. You don't move as slow when you're at 0% boost. You move almost 40% faster? Like, you move a lot faster at 0% boost than you originally did. It still deals normal scattergun damage. You can at least jump once freely. However, with all that being said, I'm actually going to give the win to the old Babyface's Blaster, and it's for one reason. Consistency. Because you didn't lose boost by taking damage. It meant you were far more in control. Sure, the damage was weaker, and we're getting back into this, but you were consistently faster as well. You didn't have to worry about getting hit by a stray bullet or something, and all your boost just immediately being depleted. As long as you didn't jump, you're good. The penalties were harsh, no doubt, but you were more consistently at full boost. Whereas now, any stray round, God forbid, explosive especially, a rocket fired halfway across the map that lands at your feet is enough to destroy your entire boost meter. So, yes, for that one reason, I am giving the win to the old Babyface Blaster. Sure, if you can manage to never get hit by anything, okay, then yeah, the current Babyface Blaster is better. However, I think most of the time, the old BFB, paradoxically less punishing, despite what I said originally. The current one is just basically Babyface's Blaster, but you are almost consistently slower, or you're moving at random speeds, and you have 2 less shells in the magazine. It's all over the place. Anyway, let's move on. Since the backscatter hasn't gone through any balance changes, that means we move on to the secondaries for Scout, which is where we have our very first and only stock weapon of this video. Yep, the pistol. The pistol is pretty straightforward, and I don't think I really need to go too in-depth about how it works. 12 rounds in a magazine, 15 base damage, fires about 6 to 7 rounds per second, or a 0.15 second attack interval if you want to do the math yourself. Reloads really fast and has kind of a wide spread. So, what has changed? Well, this weapon used to not have the same firing speed. I feel like a good chunk of you know this, and you most definitely know about this if you played on the PS3 version or the Xbox 360 version of TF2, or hell, even if you're an old PC gamer, since this wouldn't be updated until 2009, and TF2 on those consoles stopped receiving updates in early 2008. The pistol was really weird. Some like to say the pistol was originally semi-automatic. This technically isn't true. Every weapon in the game is technically automatic, with the exception of the Huntsman and Classic, I believe. There might be one I'm forgetting about. And while the weapons themselves aren't actually automatic, like the revolver, the pistol, the shotguns, rifles, and many more aren't actually automatic weapons, the reason I say automatic is because you can hold down M1 and you'll continue to fire. That's where the denotation automatic comes from. It cycles automatically, just like a semi-auto cycles automatically, but only one time. A bolt action or pump requires you to manually cycle with the bolt or the action. But enough about how guns actually work. What I'm saying is that the original pistol was not technically semi-auto, but it fired really, really slowly if you tried to use it like an automatic, at about 3 rounds per second, which is just unbelievably slow. However, it also fired about as fast as you can click the button up to a certain point, which meant if you had a really good trigger finger, you could actually outpace the modern pistol by a little bit. Mini scripts back in the day would help you do this, similar to how there's scripts with the Alibaba Wee Booties. There was one for the pistol as well, though most of you probably don't know about that because those stopped really being a thing in 2009. In general, this was a slight bonus if you had a good trigger finger or a good script, but otherwise, the pistol was a lot worse back in the day. So I'm going to say that the modern pistol for 99% of people, 100% of the time, is going to be a better pick. I think the pistol is just generally better nowadays than it was back then. Technically, you can get a little more out of it, but I don't think it's enough to give it the W. So, modern pistol, great job. The Bonk Atomic Punch is up next, as it was the first unlockable secondary for Scout pretty early on. The Bonk is pretty simple. When consumed, you'll be placed into a third-person view and gain 8 seconds of full invulnerability. During this time, you are unable to fire. Taking damage will slow you down by 25% and scale up as you reach 200 damage taken, in which case you'll be slowed by 50% for 5 seconds. And taking more than 200 damage will cap out at 50%, by the way. It technically takes 30 seconds to recharge, but begins recharging during your invulnerability period, so it is effectively 22 seconds. You are only invulnerable once you finish drinking the actual drink. You could be killed during the animation itself. I know quite a few of you remember when the Bonk Atomic Punch didn't have the slowdown effect, so you could take 1,000 damage and you would continue to move at normal speed afterwards, completely unfazed. So I know a good portion of you think this is an easy W for the old Bonk Atomic Punch. This is not the case, and the W is actually going to go to the modern Bonk for this one. And that's for one main reason. The version of Bonk I'm talking about is not the original Bonk at all. This was the middle-age Bonk. The original Bonk was not quite as good. The original version of this item had 2 for sure differences, potentially a third one, and I'll get to that and explain what I mean. So first of all, the original version of Bonk did in fact have a slowdown effect. It was actually slower, slowing the Scout down by 55%. I believe it's listed at 56% in some places, but either way, it's more than the current one is. And here's the thing, you didn't need to take damage. This was just regardless if you took damage or not. You would be given this slowdown period for just consuming the drink. It also lasted 6 seconds rather than 5. Why 6 though? Well, because 2. It also was kind of a 1-to-1 deal, since the Bonk originally only lasted for 6 seconds, not 8. Both lunchbox items actually did at one time, but I'm getting ahead of myself. You were given 6 seconds of invulnerability for 6 seconds of just over half speed reduction. And finally, the third one, I'm not 100% sure of. I've watched gameplay from 2009, and it seems like this is the case, but it might be wrong, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. Someone tell me down below if I'm correct or if I'm not. It seems that Bonk back in the day also did not have a cooldown similar to the Sandwich, but unlike the Sandwich, you would have to hit the resupply locker in order to get it back. I couldn't find anything confirming nor denying this, so like I said, once again, could be wrong, but the other two are 100% for sure, so the new Bonk is just a little bit better. That's all. It takes the win. Despite being a TF2 stat wizard, I never realized that the 2 drink items Scout has came out back to back, but they did. Next up, we have the slightly more controversial younger brother of the Bonk Atomic Punch, the Criticola. The Criticola is kind of interesting nowadays. It's gone through a million variations. I'm sure the one you most likely remember is the stupid busted version that gave you 8 seconds of mini crits, 25% faster movement speed, all for a 10% damage vulnerability. That doesn't exist anymore, and thank whoever changed that. And even the 2016 version that gave you 2 seconds marked for death period afterwards was still really strong. Nowadays, it's actually much closer to its original version than that version was. So let's talk through the current stats and then I'll demonstrate what I mean by that. The current stats are as follows. 8 seconds of mini crits upon consumption. Firing at any time during the effects will mark you for death for 5 seconds and reset if you continue to shoot. This means that you can get up to about 13 seconds of mark for death. That's assuming you shoot right as you are out of the animation, and then you fire once the effects are about to end. But really, it's 5 seconds, it resets every time you shoot. Pretty straightforward. This allows you to decide when to engage, because while you have mini crits, deciding when you fire will also mark you for death, putting you and your opponent on a more even playing field, so to speak. Like Bonk, it technically takes 30 seconds to recharge, but it's effectively 22 since the recharge starts while you're under the effects of Criticola. The old Criticola was quite similar. The original stats were even more simple than the modern version. They are as follows. 6 seconds of dealing and taking mini crits. That's it. 6 seconds of dealing mini crits, and during that time you're also taking mini crits. It marks you for death. Which version is better? Unlike Bonk, this one has a bit more wiggle room, and I think you can kind of argue either one. On one hand, you were guaranteed to take mini crits, and the mini crits only lasted for 6 seconds with the original version, which kind of sucks. But on the other hand, you didn't have to worry about taking mini crits after the duration was over, which is more likely to happen with the modern Criticola. So there's no chance where you take 35% more damage with no fall off, but you can't reciprocate with your own mini crits. That was never the case with the old version. Despite this, I'm going to say that overall the current Criticola edges out the old Criticola, since you have a little bit more choice as to when to engage. You could see a pipe flying at you and survive if you've never fired your weapon, whereas with the original version, you were going to die. So it really depends, and 8 seconds is nicer than 6 seconds. There's that too. This one's much closer, I'd say, though the modern Criticola takes the W just by a little bit. Unlike Bonk, there are times where the OG Criticola might have been even better. That's up for you to decide. Let's go on to the next Scout Secondary. We have another liquid-based item. This time it's not drinkable, that being the Mad Milk. Some of you may not even known that the Mad Milk went through any changes at all. Well, it did. 2 of them, in fact. The current stats are straightforward. Throwing Mad Milk will cause the jar to explode on the surface or player that you hit in a 200 hammer unit radius, or about 30% larger than a rocket explosion. Approximately, that is. It's a little bit more. Enemies will be coated in milk for 10 seconds after being continuously healed, which will reduce the duration by 75%, or if you throw it at a cloaked spy, which will reveal them, allowing you to chase them down, but it will reduce the time they are under the effects by 50%, reducing it to just 5 seconds. Coated enemies, when damaged, will return 60% damage done as health to the person who dealt the damage. So if a demo man hits a 100 damage pipe on a milked enemy, an enemy coated in Mad Milk that is, he'll be returned 60 HP. It also has a 20-second recharge or a 16-second recharge if you extinguish a teammate. And yeah, you can extinguish teammates as well as yourself if you throw it at the ground. That's how it works in the modern day. What about back when it was out in 2010? Well, it didn't have the 20% reduced time if you extinguished a teammate. But the original version was far superior, simply because it originally healed the person who dealt the damage. To the coated enemy, 75% damage dealt, rather than 60%. So yeah, it was just kind of better. I mean, there's not really much to say, unfortunately. The OG Mad Milk for the win. Really short segment here. Let's move on. Oh boy, our first actual pistol unlock. This one should be pretty quick as there isn't much debate here, though I still have to go over it. The first pistol added to Scout's arsenal was part of the #1 fan set, alongside the Soda Popper and the Atomizer. The pistol everyone forgot, the Winger. The Winger only has 3 stats. It deals 15% more damage to enemies, it gives you a 25% jump height bonus for both your first and second jump, all for the downside of a 60% magazine size penalty, reducing the ammo loaded from 12 to just 5. There are a lot of people who don't understand why the Winger even has a damage bonus. The whole set revolves around mobility, with the 5 mid-air jumps, the jump height bonus, and the triple jump capability of the Atomizer. Though what a lot of people don't know is that the #1 fan set was not actually a mobility-focused set at all, with the exception of the Atomizer, which still with its original stats kind of implied that it was to be used as an aggression tool, a little bit more than a mobility tool, but it could be used as both. I'll speak more about that on the melee segments. The Atomizer is the black sheep who eventually converted everybody else. The Soda Popper gave you mini crits back in the day rather than the extra air jumps. So, the extra damage was to help when using the Soda Popper if you needed more of a ranged option, since the 15 damage was now a base 17 damage plus 35% more damage. The #1 fan set was not a mobility set, it was a damage set. This was shown thoroughly with the fact that the Winger originally lacked the 25% jump height bonus. That was tacked on later. This weapon originally only did 15% more damage for holding 5 in the magazine. That was it. You can kind of see it as, like I said, it was sort of a range damage tool when used with the Soda Popper, but it also could be said to be a finisher tool. More damage, but less ammo loaded at one time, so it had to be used to finish an enemy off. Either one of those. This one can't really be disputed. It has one more upside than it originally did, no new downsides, and the upside is really useful too. Yep, the current winger, while forgettable, is still better than it was when it initially came out back in 2011. Back-to-back pistols. Next up, we have a weapon that's had so many ups and downs, highs and lows, from the best to the worst, the less bad to busted to really freaking good. We have the Pretty Boys Pocket Pistol for Scout. The current stats are pretty simple and very good. A 15% faster firing speed and up to 3 health on hit, for the downside of a 25% magazine size penalty, reducing how much the mag can hold by 3, bringing that 12 down to just 9. This is really strong in the modern day. It's not really arguable. It's almost unanimously considered the best pistol for most situations. The 3 fewer rounds for a super fast fire rate and health back on hit is just insanely strong. Though, so was the original version of this weapon. We had the Dark Ages where it had a similar +3 on hit, but with horrendous downsides such as taking 20% more damage while active and also firing 25% slower. And then on the opposite spectrum, we had the current iteration, but right after Jungle Inferno, back when it gave 7 health on hit. However, the original was quite different as it didn't give any health back at all. Instead, these right here were the original stats. I should have put them on the left side. I'm sure you looked straight at it. I'm sure I didn't fool you, because that's where I've been putting it the whole time. Anyway, rather than 3 health on hit, it gave you a flat 15 max health bonus, bringing the Scout's health from 125 to 140, or 110 to 125 if you were using the Sandman. It also had the upside of no fall damage taken on wear. I've seen a lot of people confused by this. To put simply, it's because you couldn't jump at all with the original Babyface's blaster, otherwise you would lose your boost completely. This allowed you to fall off surfaces without having to worry about fall damage or having to double jump, wasting boost. Also, I should mention that these 2 weapons obviously came from the same set, so they were meant to be used together. This came at the downside of the pistol itself being rather weak, with a 25% slower firing speed. This was really slow. If you guys used the Pretty Boys Pocket Pistol back in the day, you know how slow that was. Yes, the Pretty Boys Pocket Pistol originally fired slower than the stock pistol. Kind of 180'd on that. It also had an insane 50% fire damage vulnerability on wear. I'm sure most of you don't even remember that, but at one time it did. This was really difficult as these weapon stats are vastly different from one another. One gives you raw survivability and utility, but sucks as a pistol, and the other one gives you a little bit of both. It's sort of strange. So which one is better? Well, if there's no pyros, the odd Huolong heater heavy, or Cowmangler soldiers on the other team, you got 15 extra health and no fall damage for a slightly worse pistol. And while yes, 25% slower firing speed sucked, it still could kill or finish an enemy off, so this was really good. And plus, that 15 health is big too. More survivability is nice in general, but it also allows you to survive 2 melee hits, body shots from the classic at base damage, and that's all I got at the moment. There's probably a bunch of different denominations, but 15 extra health, no matter how you cut it, is better than not having that 15 extra health. Sure, being that vulnerable to fire sucks, but against everything else, it's pretty amazing. Plus, no fall damage is nice, even if you're not using the Babyface's blaster, so you don't have to kill your momentum. Then you have the current version, which heals you, even for a little bit, and it still increases your survivability. Plus, with its faster firing speed and negligible downside, it's really good. This one was really difficult. Honestly, you can call it a tie if you so wish, though I feel like I should give a winner to one of these, as honestly on any given day it can change. I could flip my answer tomorrow. Though I'm going to say something a bit controversial. I think as an actual weapon and tool, the current Pretty Boys Pocket Pistol wins here just by a little bit. And you could argue with that. I think 15 extra health is still a big deal. Though I think if you're an aggressive scout, that 15 extra health is nice, but having that survivability and the ability to finish enemies off really quickly is a little bit more useful most of the time. Like I said, sometimes it's not going to be that way, but I'm going to just say that the current Pretty Boys Pocket Pistol takes the W here. Let's move on to the last Scout Secondary. The Flying Guillotine, the Cleaver, Bleed Scout Staple, Pre-Jungle Inferno PTSD Inducer, whatever you want to call it. The Cleaver is a throwable projectile that moves at 3,000 hammer units, which is as fast as the Sandman Ball, Man Melter Flare, or Wrapped Assassin Ornament. It's pretty fast. It deals 50 damage on the initial hit, then causes bleed on the enemy for 5 seconds, dealing up to an extra 40 damage for a total of 90 if the bleed is allowed to run its course, assuming they don't pick up a health pack or something. It takes just over 5 seconds to recharge, taking 1.5 seconds off that recharge time if you manage to hit a long-range cleaver throw, which is cool, I guess. It also can't randomly crit. Good thing it can't, because imagine you were fighting a scout using the Flying Guillotine, which is already annoying as hell, then all of a sudden you get hit with that 150 Medic Crippler out of nowhere. I'm good. I'm glad that this stat stayed. There was a reason that this stat existed outside of just 150 damage cleaver throws would suck, though when they removed that stat, they never removed the no random crit stat, so I'm happy about that, because that would be really annoying. The Flying Guillotine used to instill fear in those who knew that the enemy scout had it, as it was almost guaranteed to be run with the Sandman. When the Cleaver was added in 2012, it worked pretty much just as it does now in terms of function, about a 5-second recharge, 50 damage on the initial hit, 40 bleed damage, etc. However, it had 2 stats that it doesn't have now. I will say that it lacked the subtraction of 1.5 second recharge time, bonus, whatever, if you hit the long range throw, but that's nothing compared to its original iteration. If you play with this item before the 2017 Jungle Inferno update, you pretty much use the original Cleaver, aside from a few bug fixes and quality of life stuff. So yeah, if you use that version of the Cleaver, you know how good it was. It would mini crit at long range instead of reducing the charge time. This increased the base damage from 50 to 68, which was nice. But the real meat of this item was its combo potential with old Sandman. Back when the Sandman could actually stun enemies, the Flying Guillotine would have a 100% crit rate, dealing 150 damage plus bleed. This sounds busted, because it was in the hands of a good scout. Though, to be fair, it could be a little bit more difficult to perform consistently unless you hit a moonshot which locked them in place. Knowing me, I'd still miss. Yeah, I don't need to say it, there's pretty much no world where the current Flying Guillotine is better than the old one. That one was just better. Not to say that the new one's bad by any means. It still is annoying. Maybe not as annoying. I shouldn't say it's as annoying, but it's still really annoying. It's still pretty good, but it's just not as good as it used to be. That will do it for Scout Secondaries. If you made it this far into the video, thank you, you're a warrior. Let's finish this longer than intended video up with the melee weapons. Scout stock melee never received any noteworthy changes, so we're moving straight into the unlocks for this one. For the first melee weapon, we have Scout's most infamous weapon. Not just melee, but weapon in general. At least in my and most rational people's opinion. This weapon used to cause the average TF2 player to have nightmares after fighting a good scout who could use this weapon effectively. I'm of course talking about the Sandman. I don't think this one's even a question, though for the sake of consistency we'll go through it. The current Sandman blows. The bat itself is the same as the stock bat. The interesting part comes with the baseball placed in his left hand, or right hand if you're a weirdo like me who uses flip view models. This ball can be launched with mouse 2 and will be struck at 3,000 hammer units, so pretty fast. The ball does 15 damage, or 8 more damage, for a total of 23 if you hit him at a long range. I know, amazing. Outside of what is effectively point-blank range, the ball slows the enemy, that's like the main function of the ball itself, down to 225 hammer units regardless of class for 1 to 7 seconds. The further they are, the longer they are slowed. This means scouts move at snail pace, while heavy or soldier just kind of shrug it off. For reference, heavy moves at 230 hammer units, and soldier moves at 240 hammer units. It takes 10 seconds to recharge, can be picked up off the ground within 10 seconds, 4 seconds if you hit an enemy, or you can pick up another scout's ball, or if another scout hits you with the ball below the waist, you'll automatically pick up their ball, for some reason. And then of course there's the resupply cabinet, don't think I really need to mention that, but just in case. This mediocre upside comes with the downside of 15 less health, which is pretty extreme for an upside that doesn't do much. Now, I know why this downside exists. It's a carryover from its but previous iteration. However, it still exists, and it sucks. If you started playing TF2 after 2017, then you never got to experience the previous version of the Sandman. And if you started playing after 2010, like I did, we never got to experience the original Sandman. Though I have heard horror stories, and I'll go over that right now. Let me walk you through how the old Sandman worked. Some may remember when the Sandman could cause you to go into the fleeing animation, unable to shoot, and if you were hit at long range, you would be completely stunned altogether, unable to move at all. Well, that complete stun mechanic, the moonshot mechanic, used to be how the Sandman worked regardless of range. Here's all the differences compared to now. First, we have the mountain of good stuff. The Sandman didn't do 23 damage at long range, I know it sucks, but it would completely stun lock enemies regardless of range, as the video shows here, that I stole off of YouTube. The stun was so strong it could stun ubercharged players. I'm sure most of you have seen this clip right here. This was stupid strong as it meant enemies were at the mercy of the scout and couldn't really do much to fight back, as they had to endure the animation and then they had to shake it off, and they were just at a complete disadvantage. While some may know, the old Sandman gave players a 25% damage resistance. However, this resistance did not exist for the Sandman on launch. To be fair, on launch, they gained the additional 50% damage resistance to the bat itself, though this was removed the next day. So, yeah, the first thing they did was buff the Sandman. Right? I know what you're thinking. However, I have to bring it up since technically it did launch this way. It also took 15 seconds to recharge instead of 10, and was fired automatically. You could not store the ball and just hit people with the bat. You had to launch the ball with mouse 1. With how strong the ball used to be, though, we can pretty much look past that. For the only differences and downsides, there was the previously mentioned 50% damage penalty on the bat itself against stunned enemies, which was removed the next day, but it also didn't have the 15 max health penalty it does now. What was the original penalty? No double jumping. You may say, that's it? Yep, that's it. Funnily enough, this actually angered people, as some people thought it would be trash because of this downside. Oh, how they were mistaken. Do I need to explain why the original Sandman was just so dominant? Stun-locked enemies, even uber-charged enemies, had no health penalty, a pretty measly downside. I know double jumping is kind of a big deal, but like, you're still scout speed, and could just completely stun-lock enemies. It was ridiculous. The Sandman went from one of the most busted weapons to one of the most disappointing weapons. From like one of the best to probably one of the worst, if not the worst, maybe not the worst, but pretty far down there in terms of weapons. So yeah, that's just how things go. Let's move on. Here we have a weapon that a good portion of you probably forgot was even in the game. The Son of the Stick is a melee for Scout that has the upside of always critting against burning enemies, as well as giving you a 25% fire damage resistance while you have it deployed, for the downside of a flat 25% damage penalty, dealing 26 damage against non-burning enemies and jumping up to 79 against burning enemies. I already know the majority of you think this is an easy victory for the modern Son on a Stick. You'd be right, but most likely for the wrong reason. I actually didn't know this until about January of this year, 2024, but the Son on a Stick used to work quite a bit differently. It's gone through quite a few iterations, 3 or 4 or so. We had the previous version that was the same as it is now, but lacked the 25% fire damage resistance it has now. So it was just a worse version than the current one. That has been the way it's been for, I want to say 13 years. The Hatless update, 2011. That was quick math, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. We had the version before that would mini crit rather than crit, but it only had a 15% damage penalty rather than 25. However, the original version was the strangest of all. The upside was a 35% damage bonus. That's it. But to counter this, it dealt 45% less damage against non-burning enemies. This made it so that the base damage was actually the same as today, at 26. However, it would deal 47 damage against burning enemies. This made it worse most of the time, as it wasn't really all that good. I will say though, there was one exception to this rule. When you got a random crit. The Son on a Stick is one of the few weapons with an on-demand crit system, in quotes, or that, through some sort of requirement, can crit. The only other one I can think of at the moment is the flare gun, and the flare guns, I should say. Either way, the Son on a Stick didn't originally crit against burning enemies, which meant if they were burning and you got a crit, you would deal 142 damage. With the high crit chance of melee weapons, this made it deadly against any burning enemy. Honestly, this could tip the scales in the favor of the original Son on a Stick, but I'm not going to really take random crits into account here. Plus, while it could absolutely tear enemies up, the current Son on a Stick is better most of the time, has a utility, and is multitudes better in servers with random crits turned off. So the current sun on a stick takes the win here. The Fan of War is up next, and it's a really underrated weapon in my opinion. Obviously, I'm not talking about man versus machine where it's the scout meta, but in casual. You'll hear my opinion on that in a future video coming up. Or maybe it already came out, no idea when I'm releasing this video. Anyway, the current stats for the Fan of War are this. On hit, you'll mark an enemy for death for 15 seconds. You can only mark a single target. Attempting to mark more than one will remove the mark for death debuff from the player that initially had it. This weapon also has a similar stat to the Bushwhacker, where it crits whenever it would normally mini-crit. Since this marks enemies for death, it means that the second successful swing on the same enemy in a row will guarantee crits. Now those crits are quite weak, dealing 26 damage, as this weapon has a 75% damage penalty, bringing down the base damage from 35 to just 9 against players. I believe it's 8 against buildings for some reason. I think it does a whole different calculation, but anyway, that doesn't matter. So how does the original Fan of War stack up? Well, this weapon has received 3 changes, and they've all been slight buffs, so the current Fan of War wins. I should just come out and say that. I'm not going to waste your time about that. I won't be mean. Of course, I'm going to tell you what they are. I mean, most of you are probably here to see what the original stats were, unless maybe you were just here for me to tell you which one wins, and in that case, I guess you can go on to the next weapon. It's the current Fan of War. But I think most of you this far in, you want to know what the original stats were, so here they are. The most notable change is that they increased the mark for death duration from just 10 seconds up to 15 seconds. This is actually pretty significant, to be honest. That 5 seconds, that 50% extra can make a big difference. I mean, that's 5 seconds where they take mini crits from your teammates, so kind of a big deal. The crit whenever normally mini crit stat was also tacked on later, which makes the other downside even worse. The current damage on this thing is pretty pitiful, at least for the first hit. However, it originally had a 90% damage penalty. It meant that it did a max of 4 damage with random damage spread, and 5 if you got a mini crit. So yeah, while the Fan of War is an amazing weapon now, underrated yes, but not groundbreaking, it was worse back in the day. We got the best version currently. We have 2 weapons left. The first one we're going to talk about is going to be one that I listed in my underappreciated weapons video for some reason, the Atomizer. The Atomizer is a great utility item for aggressive scouts or sneaky scouts who like to use their movement to their advantage to get to super sneaky places. First, you have the main draw of this weapon, the ability to perform a 3rd jump while the weapon is out and deployed. Scout already has a double jump, but they thought, screw it, let's give him a 3rd one. The Atomizer also has a weird ability to mini crit while airborne, which just means you have to be in the air. Pretty self-explanatory, but I believe this is the only instance of airborne being a requirement for a weapon effect in modern day TF2. I could be wrong, but I believe it is the only instance of it right now. The direct hit and reserve shooter used to have this requirement, and they were kind of busted because it just meant they had to be in the air. Though seeing that this is a melee weapon and you have to be airborne, it kind of evens itself out. And about this mini crit ability, it's pretty pointless. You deal 40 damage with a mini crit. That's because it has a 15% damage penalty versus players, dealing 30 damage rather than 35. It still does 35 against buildings though, so that's cool. It also has a 50% deploy speed penalty, because when the Atomizer was initially reworked, it lacked this downside. It was added back then because it allowed you to nearly bypass the while deployed stat. You only had to draw the weapon for like a split second to get that 3rd jump, and you also had no anything taken. There was no downside to doing this, so they had to add some sort of downside to make it where you had to actually commit to deploying the weapon. That's the reason why it's added. It's really not that bad. The current Atomizer is still really good as is. However, let's talk about the original Atomizer, the version a lot of us, and especially comp scouts, played with back in the day and loved. It originally subtracted 10 health for performing a triple jump, so there was actually a penalty for triple jumping. It also had the downside of a flat 20% damage penalty, dealing 28 rather than 30, or the stock 35. It also had a 30% slower swing speed. This made it a lot worse as a damage tool, despite being the #1 fan set, which was originally a damage set. I kind of went over that earlier. I know a lot of people think of the #1 fan set, the Soda Popper, Winger, and Atomizer being a mobility set, but like I said back in the day, it was not a mobility set, it was a damage set, as they all revolved around dealing damage, except for the Atomizer. Sort of, and I'll kind of get into that in a minute. This seems a lot worse than the modern day, though most of you know that I left out one very crucial detail. This weapon did not have to be deployed in order to triple jump. You might not even know a scout had the Atomizer until he triple jumped in the middle of a fight. This was especially problematic if you were like a heavy or something like that requires some form of tracking, and all of a sudden, hey, the scout just changes a direction for the third time when you didn't even realize he could do so. And that's what I'm talking about what the number one fan said. It allowed you to be more aggressive, sort of. So which one is better? Well, if you use the Atomizer purely as a tool to scale buildings and to get to advantageous spots, then you'd be fine with the current Atomizer, and it would be the best since it doesn't take any sort of health to do so, no downside for triple jumping. If that's all you're using it for, current version's the best. Though if you're more of an aggressive scout, you would find the ability to triple jump in the middle of a fight for just 10 health would be very beneficial since you never have to actually put your weapon away. On top of that, even if you're using the Atomizer as a utility, it's only 10 health. Plus, the downsides hardly mean anything since Scout's melees already suck to begin with. I'd say overall, the old Atomizer is better due to its versatility as both an aggression and flank or climbing tool, because it's a little harder to use it in the middle of a fight nowadays. You can tell they were definitely going more with that utility aspect of it, but the Atomizer is still really good. That's really all I gotta say. I was gonna add a little bit more on, but yeah, it's good. But the old one is just slightly better since it can do a bit more. One more weapon to go. Let's get on to it. Here we are, the last of Scout's weapons. This was a lot of work, and I know it's been a long watch, but we finally made it to the last weapon, and it is the Wrapped Assassin. Okay, it's not a terrible last one to talk about, so let's go over the current stats like we have with all the previous weapons. The Wrapped Assassin is like the Sandman in that it has a secondary attack that launches a projectile at 3,000 hammer units pretty fast. Unlike the Sandman, this is no baseball, but instead a Christmas ornament or a bauble. It deals the same base damage as the Sandman at 15, but it guarantees a critical hit if the ball has been traveling for at least 1 second. It will also cause the person to bleed if you hit them directly. The bauble explodes on impact, so if it hits a player or the environment, and if you hit near a player, it will deal 4 to 13 damage in a small radius, but no bleed effect will be applied. The bauble charges 25% faster than the Sandman ball, taking 7.5 seconds rather than 10, and the bat itself does 65% less damage, doing 12 rather than 35. The Wrapped Assassin used to be underrated, but in recent years it's been getting the love and respect it deserves. It's free range damage, it's great. The bat itself may be mediocre, or the role of gift wrap or whatever, but it is a scout bat, so in general you're not really using that as a weapon, so it's nice to have this damage. There has been 3 significant changes. First, it used to take twice as long for the bauble to recharge, taking 15 seconds rather than 7.5. At one time, it was actually 11.25 seconds as well, before eventually being lowered to half its original speed. This kind of has to do with the fact that the Sandman recharge time got lowered as well, so they lowered the Wrapped Assassin even more. Kind of weird, whatever. The bat itself also had a 70% damage penalty instead of a 65% damage penalty, which meant it did 1 less base damage. Even the random damage spread could not save this weapon as it would only deal 12, so it could never do more than what the current Wrapped Assassin can. The only improvement has been one little thing. It didn't originally shatter when hitting a surface, it only shattered if you hit a player. Sure, this meant you couldn't get that 4 to 13 damage splash hit, but it meant that you could track down the bauble and pick it up and try again. While this is a cool ability, I think overall the current Wrapped Assassin will be consistently better than the old one. But this really just depends on what scenario you find yourself in more. If it's a misclick and you're far away from spawn, it could be nice to pick up the bauble. Or maybe if it's a 1v1 and you just barely missed, sure, yes, picking up the bauble is nice. But in general, the super fast recharge kind of offsets the inability to pick up the ornament, and that 1 extra damage is super nice, I guess. So I think overall the current Wrapped Assassin wins this round just by a little bit. Though I don't think it's a huge difference here. I think it's just kind of, depending on player. That's all of the Scout weapons in Team Fortress 2 as of September 2024, which I doubt will change, but just in case, this video is outdated or something by chance, it's time to see who is better. I'll place them either into a better originally or better now column. Then I'll add it up at the end to see whether more weapons were better in their original version or better nowadays. I'll be doing something interesting. I'll place them in their column, but the closer to the line or middle they are, the smaller the difference between the modern and current are. So for example, if a weapon was a lot better originally, it'll be further from the line. If it was just a tad better, then it'll be a lot closer to the line to indicate that there's not much of a difference between the two. And then vice versa, so whether it's on the better now side or the better then side. You don't really need to worry too much about that. They're going to be in their columns, but just thought it would be kind of interesting to do it this way. I'll walk through each of them. For the better originally, we have the Force of Nature, the Soda Popper, the Babyface's Blaster, just by a little bit, the Mad Milk, the Flying Guillotine, the Sandman, by a lot, and finally the Atomizer for a total of 7 weapons. For the weapons that are better now, we have the Shortstop, which is really close, like right on the line. This one was really difficult for me, and I think I could be swayed either way on any given day. So this is pretty much a neutral almost. But technically, I did put it in the better now tier. The Pistol, the Bonk Atomic Punch, the Criticola, the Pretty Boy's Pocket Pistol, also very close. There's arguments for both. The Winger, not close at all. The Sun on a Stick, the Fan of War, and the Wrapped Assassin, for a total of 9. There you have it. Of the scout weapons that have been significantly balanced in some way or another, more weapons are better now than they were then. I will say though, some of these can be easily disputed. Like I said, especially the Shortstop, Babyface's Blaster, and Pretty Boy's Pocket Pistol. There are arguments for both. Then you have examples like the Sandman, Soda Popper, and Mad Milk, which were much more extreme and just way better originally, so it kind of skews our perception. And then I feel like there's sometimes where it's like the Babyface's Blaster, where it's like the middle portion is where we kind of get thrown off a little bit, versus the original stats and the current stats. Bit of a word salad there, but I hope you understand what I meant by that. Either way, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments who you'd like to see next, if you would like to see more. Also, was I right about certain weapons? Was I wrong about certain weapons? Anything I missed? It's all appreciated. Feel free to comment down below. I'll see you later. Bye.